Hello everyone, my name is Quad, and if you don't know, the status effects in Warframe have recently gotten a little bit of a rework into a more simplified system than before. In this video, I will show you how the system works now, like specific faction resistances, individual and combined status effects, and all the tidbits that are important in my opinion. Targeted audience for this video are people who don't know anything or very little about the system, such as new players or returning players, so I will try to explain things as simply as possible, but for the veterans this is probably gonna be boring, so if you have anything else to add, please add it down in the comments. But let's start now. First, let's look at the faction vulnerabilities and resistances. Currently there are 8 factions and 3 sub-factions in the game. I will just say 11 factions to simplify things. Each faction has a resistance and vulnerability to specific status types. This means the faction will take more or less damage depending on the status type you are using on your weapons. You can easily check this in the game by going to your weapon and hovering over the status types in the damage section. For example, Puncture damage will deal 1.5 times more damage to both the Corpus and the Orokin, Slash will deal more damage to the Infested and an Armor, Cold to Sentience, and so on. These are all damage vulnerabilities, but there are also faction resistances, example of which can be Corrosive, which will deal 0.5 times damage to the Sentience. With this, we can conclude that going into a mission with sentient enemies is not the best thing to do with corrosive damage, since they take less damage, but that is not entirely true. See, each status type in Warframe has a special status effect that either reduces the damage enemies deal, staggers enemies, does damage to them over time, and so on. We will go over every single status type and its effect right away, but first let me just tell you about the status chance. Status chance is the chance that you will apply a stack of status effect on a target. The game beautifully calculates everything for us nowadays. You only have to hover over the status chance number on your weapon. If we look here, I have 3 status types on my weapon: Puncture, Slash, and Impact, with different damage numbers. I also have a status chance of 5%. If I hover over the status chance number, I will see the chance every specific status effect will be applied to the target. Puncture 1.2%, Slash 2.5%, and Impact 1.2%, which all corresponds to the amount of damage I deal. If I get a mod that will increase my slash damage only, for example, Slash will get a much higher chance to be applied to the target, 3.5% in my case. I recommend you play around a bit and see how the system works for yourself, but there are some weapons with insane status chance numbers as well, like my Kuva comb right here, which has 132.9% chance to apply a viral status effect onto a target, which simply means that it will apply one status effect 100%, plus it will have a 32.9% chance to apply a second one. But yeah, that is it about applying these status effects onto an enemy. Let's now look at how it works. When you see an enemy and shoot it, you will see that the enemy can get a little symbol on top of it, which is the status effect you applied. Sometimes a status effect will have a number next to it, which is called a stack. Now, each status type here works a bit differently, so we will go every single one of them one by one. We will first start with the physical status effects, Puncture, Slash, and Impact. We will then continue with individual elemental status effects, Toxin, Heat, Cold, and Electricity, and for the end we will also go over the combined elemental status effects, Gas, Blast, Radiation, Magnetic, Viral, and Corrosive. I will also show you how to get every single status effect, so don't worry. But for real, I recommend you play a bit with the status effects yourself. But yeah, let's first start with the Puncture status effect. The max of Puncture stacks is 5, and each one will reduce the enemy damage output by 16 percentage points, up to 80%. Additionally, every stack will increase the amount of critical damage the enemy receives by 5 percentage points, up to 25%. In my opinion, the best way to use puncture damage is against heavy enemies that deal a lot of damage. So, you at least don't get damaged as much. Honestly though, puncture is probably not the best effect and might be one of those by chance status effect that you deal sometimes. So yeah, in the late game it will not be seen as often. The next status effect is Impact, which has 5 max stacks. Each time you get a stack of impact on the enemy, it will stagger it and keep it staggered for some time. Additionally, it will also increase the threshold of being able to perform a mercy kill on the Eximus units and heavy units by 8 percentage points per stack. Impact is not the best of status effects, but it does at least help you get rid of the heavier units in the early game a lot quicker. I'd honestly stay away from it in the later game because it's just not that useful since the amount of enemies you have to kill is insanely high, but if I'm honest, the builds that are not that good traditionally are probably the better ones to play with, at least more fun and different. The next effect, and the last physical effect, is Slash status effect that has infinite amounts of stacks. Each status effect you get on the enemy will deal 35% of your base weapon damage every second for 6 seconds, so doing damage over time. Additionally, slash damage over time does avoid enemy armor, the enemies that have orange health bars, making it great to use against the Grineer. But yeah, that is it about the physical status damage types. Now let's go over the individual elemental status types. Toxin status type has infinite stacks that will deal 50% damage each second for 6 seconds. It is very similar to Slash, with the only difference being that it will avoid shields instead of armor. Because of this, it is great against the Corpus. Just plop a few Toxin effects on them and they are done for. You do have to remember that it is still damage over time though, so you won't kill an enemy in a millisecond right after you proc enough statuses on them. But it is fun to watch them twitch in agony. Okay, yeah, another status effect is Heat damage type that also has infinite stacks and will deal 50% damage each second for 6 seconds. Additionally, it will also make the enemies panic for a few seconds and will decrease their armor by 50%. This is a status effect that is great for crowd control and amazing to combine with Corrosive, which we will cover a bit later. Another status effect that is great for crowd control is Electricity, which also has infinite stacks. It will deal 50% damage you deal each second for 6 seconds, and additionally it will also shock the enemies and also nearby enemies close to them, so it is great for crowd control, as I said. It excels in late game when you have to do Steel Path solo, for example. When you have to kill so many enemies, it is insane, especially for example solo survivals that are enemy packed into oblivion, so yeah, it is good to have electricity if you can't handle all the enemies. But anyways, before I start rambling about electricity too much, the last basic elemental individual status effect is Cold type, which has the max of 10 stacks. Each stack will reduce every enemy action by 10 percentage points and will effectively freeze them for a few seconds when you reach 10 stacks. Additionally, the enemies affected with cold status will receive more critical damage with each stack to the max of 0.5 critical damage additive, so plus 0.5. Because of this, cold is great for builds focused on critical mods, and in my opinion, one of the best status effects for weapons with which you really have to aim. Like bows, for example. All of them are pretty much critical damage based, so yeah, amazing. But yeah, that is it for individual status types. Now let's look at the combined ones. Magnetic status type is a combination of cold status and electricity status mods. It has a maximum of 10 stacks that will do a bunch of things. First, it will increase enemy shield regeneration. Secondly, it will amplify damage against enemy shields up to 325%. 25 percentage points per stack, starting with initial 125%. And lastly, it will also overload enemy shields when they are depleted, dealing electricity damage against the enemy and all the enemies around it, just like electricity status effect. This status effect is only good against enemies that have shields because they don't do anything if they don't have one, so yeah, be sure to play against the Corpus. But anyway, let's go to the next one. Radiation status type is a combination of heat and electricity status types, and it stacks up to 10 stacks total. Enemies under radiation status effect will attack the nearest enemy that is allied to it, with additional status effects, increasing the amount of damage it will deal to its allied enemies to the max of 550%. The amount of damage the enemy will deal to you will stay the same though, so don't worry, it only increases the damage it deals to other enemies. It is a good status effect for crowd control, but it is one of the worst status effects for defense missions because the enemies will just stay behind and never come to the objective. It is a bad thing to use. The next status effect is viral status type, which is a combination of toxin and cold status types, and it stacks up to a total of 10. What it does is quite straightforward. It increases the amount of damage you will deal to the health of the enemies by 325% at 10 stacks, starting with 125% with the first stack and increasing by 25 percentage points with each additional stack. The next status type is Blast, which is a combination of heat and cold status types. It stacks up to 10 stacks, but it does get better. Each stack you get on the enemy will deal 30% of the weapon's base damage in a small explosion after a few seconds. If you get to 10 stacks though, the explosion will deal all the damage at once, so 10 times 30%, which is 300%. Additionally, if the enemy doesn't die, it will also get staggered, so it is perfect for crowd control and extreme amounts of damage in a short period. It is really good to play around with, especially on weapons that are really fast and stack up a lot of blast status effects on enemies on a very small area, so it is perfect for survival missions on Steel Path, if you ask me. But anyways, let's continue to the next one, Gas status type, which is a combination of heat and toxin. It stacks up to 10 times and deals 50% damage per second in a 3-meter radius. You can see the radius with the gas cloud around the enemy. With each stack, the radius increases to 6 meters from 3 meters, as I said, so yeah, it is amazing for dealing with massive crowds, such as the infestation, but may not be the best at dealing insane amounts of damage right away. You know, some people just play it for the symbol of the gas mask, which is... I like those people. Anyways, the last status type we need to go over is Corrosive, which is a combination of electricity and toxin mods. It stacks up to 10 times, and what it does is quite unique. It reduces enemy armor by 8 percentage points to the max of 80%. It is great to use against the Begineers and any other enemies with larger amounts of armor. I know I did not mention it, but you know, you can later in the game get something called Archon Shards, even the Tau Forged Archon Shards, which are able to reduce the enemy's armor to 0 only with weapons, but you can also reduce it with abilities, so, you know, you need to test out a bit and kind of find your own playstyle. Don't listen to what other people say. With this, we have gone over all the status types, so I'm going to end the video soon, just let me rant a bit. The community is very quick to jump upon one status type and roll with it. At the moment of me making this video, the status type is Blast, which is great status type to use since it does do a lot of damage very quickly, but it also sucks out the fun of actually making fun builds if you will only go for Blast. Remember that the max level of enemies is over 9,000. Literally. So, you know, against Steel Path enemies that start at level 120, you don't need all the freaking mods and all the best blast effects and whatever. You just need a fun build. That is it. I recommend you play around with status types of your own and find the best status that suits you. My favorite status is Heat, which doesn't sound that good, but I just love to see enemies and the world burn. So, you know, I like it. I also recommend you keep the enemies' vulnerabilities and resistances in mind, since they do change the game quite a lot. But yeah, with this, I do thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. I will try to answer them. And if you have any tips, also let me and others know. But yeah, with this, I thank you for watching and wish you a very nice day. Bye, guys!